Okay, so with blood typing, here we go again one more time. So we remember that the antigen is this marker. It is a molecule on the cell surface that helps the cell be identified by other cells, particularly identified by the immune system. So we call red blood cells antigen-presenting cells because they have these little markers on the outside that the immune system can identify. The ABO blood system, which is the one we're interested in, and the rhesus system, these ones are, these two systems were discovered in the 1900s, 1940 by Karl Landsteiner. And the rhesus factor, which was actually originally discovered in monkeys. It was discovered in the rhesus monkey. That's why it's a rhesus factor. And it's also common for a couple of other primates. And it's another type of antigen that we find, and these cells can be positive or negative. So we have our A, B, AB blood, and O-type blood, and then your positive and negative. So this is some cartoons we can use. We can see that what we've done is we've created A-type blood with an A antigen, B-type blood with a B antigen. Here's your AB blood where it has both antigens on it, and then the O-type blood, which is antigen-free. O-type blood is the most common blood worldwide. Depending on the country you're from, it's a higher percentage or a lower percentage. But if you included the whole human race, or human species, O-type blood is the most common. Although the reason that O-type blood is formed is actually from several different sources. So it's actually it's a mutant variation that's very common and due to several different mutations. Then we have the rhesus factor. Rhesus factor is really common. 85% are Rh positive. I remember my wife was really disappointed when she found out she was A negative because she thought like both of us were A positive, and she's like, "Yay, we're both A plus students, you know, like, hey, we're A positive." And then she went to the doctor right before she was pregnant, and she's like, "Wait, A negative? What?" And she was really upset because that meant Winrow's shots and Rh disease and things like that. But mostly because it meant that she was no longer an A plus; she was an A minus. Not that it has any role in that at all. Okay, so the antibody, these are molecules that your immune system creates, and they help the white blood cells to find these types of cells and to attack them. So they are created in the response to foreign antigens, and they are released into the blood plasma. They're one of those proteins that are floating around in the plasma. And they are present in our blood so that non-self cells, non-self here is trying to say like invaders, foreign cells, can be identified and destroyed. Type A blood will produce anti-B antibodies. So these are ones that will connect, and see they've tried to use drawings that match, right? So they use a square so that it connects to this other square, so the anti-B would be able to connect to that protein. And this is like a good cartoon model for what's really happening. What's really happening is that on the cell surface there is some sort of protein, and what has happened is your immune system has created a complementary protein that will actually lock together and will create a connection, and then on the other side of the antibody, around this tail area here, that's a sensor or a stimulator for the immune system. So the immune system recognizes the tail of this molecule. It recognizes these little tails, and then these parts recognize the proteins on the outside surface, and will lock to it. A blood has anti-Bs, B blood has anti-As. AB has no antigens, because it no antibodies because it has both antigens. O type has both antibodies because it has no antigens. Rh plus has no antigens because Rh plus blood has the antigen on it. Rh minus has no antibodies has antibodies because it has no antigens. So this is our little cartoon of how this looks in floating around. In the body without donation, you would have in the A-type blood, we can see our A antigen here, A antigen, and then our anti-B antibody. It's pretty ugly. I'm going to get my pen out so I'm actually right. Let's try that one more time. So this is our anti-B antigen. So on the outside of the B-type blood, we would call this B antigen. Antigens are on the surface of the cell versus this little protein helper here. This would be our A, or our anti-A antibody. Okay. Anti as in against the attacker. Here we see both A and B antigens. A antigen, and here's our B antigen. And of course, now we see that there are no antibodies. So no protection from the other bloods. If we continue over here, we see the anti-A and the anti-B. And of course, on O, we see no antigens. If the cell was rhesus positive, we would be able to find the rhesus factor on the cell wall, and no antibodies for rhesus, no anti-RH. And over here we have rhesus negative, so no rhesus factor. But we do have the anti-RH. So there's an interesting thing for these antibodies. Typically, to produce antibodies in most cases, you have to be exposed to the invader. This is how it works for our immune system when it attacks bacteria or pathogens, viruses. You usually have to be exposed once, then your body finds a way to produce antibodies to attack that invader on the second time you're exposed. This is one of those reasons you can only get chickenpox once. Right? Your body becomes immune to that because they produce the ability to attack that chickenpox virus the next time it attacks. What's interesting is that in the AB blood system, I believe they said it's within the first year of life, you automatically produce the antigens. It's just an interesting thing about the ABO group. your body automatically is able to produce the antigens without actually being exposed to the other blood types. It's one of the only examples where you produce antibodies spontaneously. The Rh factor is not spontaneous. You usually need an exposure, either a blood transfusion or a mixing of blood at some point. Then your body will produce antibodies, and from that point on, if you are Rh negative and you've been exposed to Rh positive blood, that's when it becomes dangerous. That's why we talked about the second baby. The second baby is the one at risk. The first baby is the one who exposes the mother's blood to the positive antigen. So then that Rh negative mother starts to produce anti-Rh, and then the second baby, the mother's blood is prepared to attack it. This has some benefits. It means that if you're in a pinch, you're stranded on an island, you know the other person has A-type blood just like you, but you're not sure if they're positive or negative. If this is your very first blood transfusion, just go for it. You'll probably survive, right? Because if it's your very first blood transfusion, even if you're Rh negative, you probably haven't had a chance to create antibodies yet. Now, if you're on that same island with someone who has AB blood and you have A-type blood, don't take it, right? Because even if you've never received a transfusion, you already have those anti-Bs, just because those are spontaneous. These ones, you need exposure. These ones are spontaneous. You already have them now. Everybody in this room has already created the antigens for the opposite blood type. But if anybody in this room, only the people in this room who have been exposed to other people's blood or mixing of blood, if they're negative, only those ones who have been exposed have a risk of having the antigens. It's just an interesting fact. I wouldn't ask you a question about it on a test. I just thought it was cool. No, I'll try not to ask you a question about that. Okay, agglutination. So this is what happens. So agglutination is when the antibodies recognize and attack non-self cells, so invader cells. This causes the red blood cells to clump. This clumping results in large blood clots that are extremely dangerous because they can lead to death because the blood can't circulate. This is why we need to type before a transfusion. And I just made a little note from one of the videos we just watched. Some of the things that can happen. We can get kidney failure. In addition to the blood clotting and all the dangers of blood clots, and at the very least, shock. And shock is it's a very generic term. It's usually sort of a result it's a result of your body entering a state that it's not in homeostasis. And it can have a variety of symptoms, including sort of a panic type of reaction. Your blood temperature can all go funky. You can end up shaking and other stress factors. So, for example, if I have type A blood, and I receive blood from someone who is type B, my anti-B antibodies are going to recognize the type B blood as non-self because of the foreign B antigens. The antibodies will attach to the B antigens of the donor's blood, and this will result in an agglutination. And so here are all the cells sort of being clumped together as white blood cells are attacking it, and they're trying to eat them, and they're kind of clumping them, and they're trying to create a mass that would eventually be broken down and taken away. Here's a little bit more on Rh. So here you have some nice little reference notes here. During pregnancy, a woman who is Rh negative may develop antibodies against her Rh positive baby. In other words, the Rh positive blood triggers the production of anti-Rh antibodies, which then cross the placenta and may attack the baby, particularly if it's the second baby. Let's put that there.
But how does it attack the baby though if the baby has Rh negative?
So it would only be if the baby was Rh positive. So the mother would be Rh negative and the baby would be Rh positive. So that would only happen if your partner was also Rh positive. So Rh positive is a dominant trait. So if you have a Rh negative mother, so we usually use circles for moms, or she's negative. So an Rh negative mother and an Rh positive father, they together have a chance of producing children that have either Rh positive or Rh negative. So they can have Rh positives. It'll probably be about, at the best, it would be a 3 to 1. So it's quite a high chance it's quite a high chance if you have an Rh positive father, the child will be Rh positive. Most likely, both of my children are Rh positive, even though their mom is Rh negative. And so the first child is not that big a deal because the antibodies aren't really there, and you know the chance of blood mixing is still relatively small, but on the second child the risk is a little bit higher because it's very hard to test if the blood is mixed, and so that's where the Windrose shot comes in. It stops you from developing those antibodies. It prevents that process from happening when the baby's at its most close to being delivered. All right, particularly. This triggering can also occur in a woman who has had a miscarriage, an abortion, an ectopic pregnancy, so that's one outside of the uterus, or a blood transfusion. Women with Rh negative blood should be tested for whether they have developed anti-Rh antibodies, as it may affect future pregnancies. An injection of Rh immunoglobulin can help prevent the production of these antibodies during the first pregnancy. So that's really what the Windrose shot is all about. It's a type of cell that actually attacks those cells that would produce the antibodies. Protects you. All right, so here we go. Here is the table you can complete, identical to the one that we just did, so I'm going to leave that to you. When we think about transfusions, it's useful to consider the donor only donates red blood cells that contain the antigen. It is the receiver's antibodies that will attack the cell marked as non-cell. I just left a big blank. So, I don't know what they want you to put in that box. I guess we'll just leave it blank. It just says, when thinking about transfusion, it's useful to consider how the donor only donates red blood cells containing the antigen. It is the receiver's antibodies that will attack the cells marked as non-cell. So if the donor has A antigens, then the receiver should also have A antigens. This is one way to look at it. Or, yeah, that makes sense. So the receiver here should be A, or maybe you have to have both A antigens. I'll leave that there. Okay, so please fill out that table, and then on the back you'll also find another example of these cartoons, and try to go through and type the bloods that we see. So no, it's a little bit confusing because they're labeled A through H. The labeling is just there for labels, not for the type of blood, right? So when we look at the cell A, what type of blood is that? O? Just O? Or O? Because the circles here represent the Rh factors. So this one would be O. You got it. O negative. All right. You're good to go. So we say none. So this is what I would expect for this one. So on A, we see no antibodies, or none. So the blood type is O negative. And then what antibodies would O negative blood have in it? Yeah. So we would have the anti-A, anti-B, and if it's O negative, anti-RH. And so, what blood could you donate to this O negative person? Only O negative, yeah. It is a universal donor, but it is not a universal acceptor. Okay, thanks everybody. I'm going to leave you with that to work. Please let me know if you need any help. O and AB. Well, O actually both antibodies.
They're not right.
Well, O has no antigens, but they will have they'll have all antibodies.
So that means if O receives blood from
Then their antigens would attack that AB blood. So we can see here that here's your O, right? And it has the antigens here. So there's both antigens are there. So those would attack the triangles and the squares.
Oh.
Yeah. So that's wrong. So that's why O is not universal in its acceptance. It can only donate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Have yourself a good day.
Yeah, have yourself a great weekend.